Hi there, everyone. Today I'm going to be reading a story called Lost in Space from the novel Take Us to Your Chief by Drew Hayden Taylor. Nothing. Everything is nothing, and nothing is everything. Only breathing and my thoughts. Like a dinosaur destroying meteor crashing into a primitive planet, a loud buzzer suddenly dragged the free floating man out of his world and into the hard reality of technology surrounding him. Mitchell had been hovering effortlessly, drifting both in the gravity vacuum of space and, more interestingly, in and out of consciousness. Small tethers from the right shoulder and left pant cuff of his jumpsuit anchored him to the bulkheads. This was to make sure that he didn't bump into the wall of the ship and ruin his fun. His mind had no such restrictions and had meandered back and forth between alpha, beta, delta, and all remaining brain wave frequencies. The small room was dark and the temperature was neutral, a sort of purgatory. Additionally, the oxygen in this hyperbaric chamber had been reduced to a minimum, allowing for more recreational time alone. In other words, he was mellowing out in the 21st century version of an improvised isolation tank, or he had been. Mitchell, I am sorry to interrupt you, but there was a slight hiss as the ship's computer injected more oxygen into the chamber, forcing Mitchell into a fully conscious state. After a few seconds, he struggled to find his voice. Yo, Mac, that was rude. As usual, his throat was a little tender from working twice as hard to take in half as much as oxygen. He noticed the light level increasing the visibility of the opaque blue walls surrounding him. Again, I am sorry. Even in his foggy state, Mitchell was sure that he could hear a subtle Newfoundland accent coming from the ship's verbal access interface. No doubt a joke from the people who had programmed Mac, short for machine. Are you Mac? Do you know what sorry actually means or feels like? Mitchell yawned as the oxygen flushed through his system. I have done the research. I believe I have an approximation. Mitchell quickly checked the stat board embedded in the wall 4 feet in front of him to make sure everything was working as it should in the chamber and correspondingly in his body. As monotone as usual, everything was fine. Let's leave that philosophical discussion for another time. I assume you have a reason for waking me? I don't understand. This is not your siesta period, as you call it, yet you appear to be sleeping. Are you unwell? Not this again, thought Mitchell. The problem with these computerized human personalities was their limited understanding of the true human condition, though they frequently claimed to understand it. That was the frustrating part. He'd always meant to send a scathing report to the people who programmed these things, but they probably wouldn't do a thing about it. Mitchell would simply have to suffer in silence, and silence was the norm when you're in outer space. I was not sleeping, I was just giving my brain a rest. There was a pause as the machine processed this, and this involves manipulating the oxygen, light, and gravity levels in this hyperbaric chamber. Judging by your readings, you were barely conscious. Typically, Mac, or any of the new type of synthesized intellects, wouldn't understand the concept or wanting to take a break from reality. They only had reality. That was the total purpose of their existence. Their primary function, to deal with the reality of crossing vast expanses of nothing for intolerable periods of time and dealing with 1,000 different ways the universe could kill a human. Mac didn't understand that out here in the asteroid belt, for looking for minerals, things could get a little lonely and boring. So an individual planning to remain sane had to do what he could to keep himself amused. What with the strict restrictions on recreational pharmaceuticals, which could be easily scanned and identified by the launch port headquarters, this was the best Mitchell could do so he could turn off his brain. Unfortunately, it wasn't exactly what he wanted. It was more of a heightened or altered state. If he was lucky, maybe he'd hallucinate a bit, a self-generated fun. It wasn't much. In fact, it was kind of desperate. But out here, anything was better than nothing. He also had Mac looking over his shoulder should some mishap occur. He knew Mac was more than likely to put this in the report to the company that owned and operated the ship, but he figured he could probably talk his way out of it. He was good at that. This 2-year tour in space was his third long-term mission. He was slated for a fourth 6 months after getting back. Still, that didn't explain why Mac had just woken him up. Just leave it alone, Mac, and answer my question. Why did you interrupt my downtime? There was a message for you. Was it important? Depends on how you defined important. That is purely subjective judgment. If it was possible to throttle a machine, that's exactly what Mitchell would be doing right now. Instead, he took a deep breath of the richer O2 levels and reformulated the question to the machine. Is it time sensitive, relevant to the safety of the ship or to myself? Does it substantially change the nature of the direction of our mission? Again, a delay from Mac. No. Then I guess it wasn't that important, was it? While he was up, he might as well get something to eat. The food substitutes weren't especially tasty, but at least eating helped pass the time between asteroid scans. True space exploration consisted largely of boredom. Your grandfather, Peter Shabagwis, has died. Mitchell stopped breathing for a second. Although this news does not fall under any of the categories you mentioned, I believe, based on my knowledge of human nature, it can still be classified as important. Am I in error? I ask only in case a similar situation should arise in the future. I believe you have another grandfather back on Earth and one remaining grandmother. Papa Peter was dead. This was such a surprise. Although Papa Peter had been well into his 80s, Mitchell thought Papa Peter would outlive him and everybody in the family. He was that kind of man, old but not infirm, aged but not weak, slow but he was still sharp, and tough. Now he was no more, while Mitchell floated out here, further away from the old man he could ever imagine. Part of him wished Mac had not woken him up with this announcement. No, Mac, you did the right thing. Disembarking from the chamber, Mitchell immediately felt the resumption of faux gravity, so called because it was a system of magnetic attraction instead of legitimate gravity. A metallic resin added to the material in his clothing interacted with a small magnetic force coming down from the deck plates to give a rudimentary sense of gravitational pull. His organs and hair still knew there was, in fact, no downward drag, but at least the added effort of movement kept his muscle degeneration at about 40% at the expected level, meaning longer, less debilitating trips in space. Do you need me to do anything? Lost in thought, Mitchell shook his head before remembering Mac did not have the interior optical sensors. No thanks, Mac. I'll take it from here. Papa Peter, his indigenous grandfather, the only real Aboriginal influence in his life. The remaining 2 forebears were non-native, and his mother, Papa Peter's daughter, had died when Mitchell was 9 years old. He had only met the man in person a half-dozen times, but had felt a certain kinship. His father had always tested him in positive ways, like making him explain as a child why the universe above was more important than the world below. Once the boy had figured that out and found a way to explain it logically and passionately, his career had been chosen. A good chunk of Papa Peter's philosophy of life could be summed up in a single sentence. Step up and represent, or just go home. There's no room in the middle. In postings and video chats, the old man had shown a greater interest in Mitchell's life than most of his closer relatives. And when he was first offered these astronomical forays, Peter Shabagwis had been excited for him, maybe even a little envious. When I was young, they had just landed on the moon. Such adventures. Bring me back a rock, a pretty one. Maybe it'll help me get a girlfriend. This was the last video message, a couple days before Mitchell left the confines of the Earth. He had not yet found a rock worthy of his grandfather, but he would now, and he would return to his grandfather's community and lay it on his grave. He had a whole asteroid belt to pick from. Yes, it was against protocol for extraterrestrial objects to be handed out so casually. Quarantine would definitely be upset. But right now, Mitchell didn't really care. Where he was now and what he was doing, looking for the known in a universe of the unknown and then returning it to what his grandfather's people called Turtle Island for the betterment of everyone, this was the only tribute he could manage for the man. Back in his quarters, Mitchell searched for the file containing the recorded messages sent to him from Papa Peter, Otter Lake First Nation, planet Earth. He sat and watched 4.5 hours of video messages from his grandfather, sitting in front of the same unremarkable kitchen background, wearing the same baseball cap, playing back to back the 10 years of messages he'd collected during his multiple survey trips. He noticed something that had escaped him in past viewings. He could see his grandfather getting older, grayer, aging with each recording. The man was still bubbly with vitality, especially when he laughed, but it was easy to see the passing years etching signature on his face. One of his grandfather's last communications got Mitchell thinking. The old man had posed some interesting questions, sitting at his kitchen table, ruminating on his grandson's career. Just idle thoughts about the nature of space travel and Aboriginal identity, two things not usually found together. Kitchen talk, he called it. If he had looked outside the ship, Mitchell would have seen Ceres, one of the largest asteroids in the solar system, a scant 1,000,000 kilometers or so off the port side. Already well surveyed and picked over, it held no mystery or potential for his mission. But this was a moot point, for the astronaut's mind was back on Earth, sitting in the ramshackle kitchen, enjoying some tea. I was thinking about you the other night. I couldn't sleep, so I went outside and looked up into the heavens. I knew in a few weeks you would be up there somewhere, going about your job, just like I am down here in my little cabin, washing the dishes. Boy, when I was a kid, I used to think the store, with all its candy, was so far away. I had to walk so far to lose all of my teeth from that candy. I guess we learn things all the time, huh? For a moment, the old man's eyes grew distant, but then a lopsided smile Mitchell knew was so well returned. I want you to think about something. Everything I was taught about being an Anishinaabe was tied to the land. Everything we were, everything we did came from our relationship to this chunk of earth our people stand on. I know you weren't raised much with our traditions, but I like to think somewhere deep inside of you is a fair-sized chunk of Anishinaabe, just like those expensive minerals you look for in all those rocks way up there. Maybe that's why you're so handsome. Now it was Mitchell's turn to smile as he listened to his grandfather's recordings. But being native in space, now that's a head scratcher. Think about it. We sprang from Turtle Island. The earth and water are so tied to who we are. There's an old saying. The voice of the land is in our language. But what happens when you aren't able to run your fingers through the sand along the river, or walk barefoot on the grass, or feel the summer breeze blowing through your hair? Nothing natural, only manufactured things around you now. Manufactured water, manufactured food, manufactured air, even manufactured gravity. I understand you even got a manufactured friend up there to talk to. I know that everything we are, we carry inside us, but I can't help wondering if it's possible to be a good, proper native astronaut. Sometimes I get weird thoughts. Hey, bud? Mitchell froze the image of Papa Peter on his monitor and let his grandfather's smile hover continuously a few feet from his face. Maybe the old man was right. The few things Mitchell had picked up from the elder did seem to contradict everything the astro surveyor did. First and foremost, no matter how hard he tried, he just could not see Papa Peter, who had dressed perpetually in jeans and denim or plaid shirts, up here in the coveralls Mitchell had been issued. He might have been allowed to keep his baseball cap, though, nor could the young man imagine his grandfather eating the food, which was bland, no matter how much the mineral cops tried to liven up the meals. Papa Peter would probably have said, "There was never enough salt in this stuff that you call food up here." But it was the broader implications his grandfather had brought up that raised uncomfortable and complicated issues. Papa Peter burned sage every morning to greet the new day and to honor the four directions. So many things in Mitchell's current environment made that simple practice impossible. He might be allowed to bring sage on board, but he certainly couldn't light it in this oxygen-enriched atmosphere that had rather severe and unforgiving fire suppression technology. Half a second after he ignited the sage, the entire ship would be breathing a distasteful and obnoxious fire retardant that had been sprayed into the ventilation system. It would take days to get rid of the smell. And there was no dawn or rising sun. The sun never moved, except to recede into the distance. The ship's chronometer told him when dawn was, but that was an arbitrary choice by headquarters. Of course, Mitchell could rationalize things however he wanted. He remembered an old saying stating that home is where you hang your hat. Well, dawn could be whenever you got up. The problem was that when you started rationalizing too many things, the significance of the original action was gone. Also, how is it possible to honor the four directions when there were none out here? No north, south, east, or west, just the endless, horizonless expanse of space. There was a planetary plane, even a galactic plane, but that was rationalizing things again. Some Aboriginal nations in North America believed that there were actually 7 directions, the original 4, plus up, down, and wherever you were standing. Up and down complicated things even further, but Mitchell was still fairly confident he knew he was on that 7th direction, one of the 7, not a particularly good batting average. Other bits and pieces of conversations with Papa Peter came flooding back. The man gave thanks to Mother Earth and Father Sky on a regular basis. This was another difficult reckoning. Mother Earth was very far away. In fact, Mitchell was closer to the backside of Mother Mars, if a planet named after the god of war could be given such a maternal designation. As for Father Sky, it all depended on how you defined sky. Blue, filled with oxygen, nitrogen, and various trace elements, with clouds and high-flying birds, or simply everything above Mother Earth. It was all getting so complicated. Sitting in a storage locker back on Earth, he could even remember exactly where he had gingerly leaned in against a side wall was the hand drum of Papa Peter had sent him. Made of moose hide and cedar with a stylist painting of an otter on one side, it was one of Mitchell's most treasured possessions. He had listed it on the content form for objects he planned to bring along on the mission, knowing full well it was unlikely to be allowed. And he was right. First of all, it was made of non-sterilized animal and plant matter. Second, it was bulkier than most personal belongings were permitted to be, and would therefore take up precious space. Third, it was just weird. Launchport had things against weird. His supervisors and technicians who serviced the vehicle he toured the solar system in pointed out in very specific terms to the frustrated auto surveyor that because of the extreme delicate calibration of many instruments on the ship, any unauthorized and unanticipated vibrations within the hull could be catastrophic. Bottom line, no drum, and especially no playing the drum. No sweetgrass either, not even a lousy dream catcher. Space was meant for atheists or people who had little spiritual inclination, it seemed. But then Mitchell remembered that there had been a Christian astronaut, Muslim ones, and probably a smattering of other faiths. Delaney, an Irish Catholic woman in his training program, had said all she needed was a cross around her neck and her faith in God, and she was ready to face the universe. Papa Peter would probably say it sounds harder to be a good native person in space. Are you okay? You seem quiet today. Mac's programmed rising tone at the end of the question usually irritated Mitchell. Today, it barely registered with him. Of course he was quiet. Who was he going to talk to? He hadn't reached the point of talking to himself yet. After a month on the mission to relieve the tedium, he had found himself humming songs he remembered from his childhood. But Mac kept asking questions about the function of humming and the meaning of the songs. Mac had been programmed to be interactive as a means of keeping the minds of crew members lively and engaged. Mitchell wished that he could find a program in Mac's hard drive and erase it. He knew where he was. He knew what he signed up for. He didn't need a computer trying to be human. Nobody needed that. Besides, small talk had always annoyed him. Is it related to the death of your grandfather? Closing his eyes, Mitchell struggled to answer without registering anger. Mac was highly unlikely to be hurt or insulted, but reacting irritably to a machine asking a question was one of the first symptoms of a long-term astroserver losing it. Yes, it is, Mac. Could you just leave me alone for a while? It's a human thing. I understand. Does Mac really understand? Mitchell wondered, or was that some sort of pre-programmed response? But I have taken the liberty of researching your grandfather. I hope that is all right. The anger was returning, bubbling. Why would Mac have done that? Mitchell felt violated. I thought you might like this. 9 years ago, your grandfather appeared at a National Aboriginal Day in Ottawa. He was part of something called the Drum Group. I have 42 minutes of archival video of his performance. Would you be interested? Mitchell opened his eyes, completely surprised. On the screen was an image of his grandfather sitting around a drum with a half a dozen other men. What seemed to be hundreds of people, a mixture of native and non-native, were gently swaying and singing along with the traditional song. The familiar skyline of the nation's capital stood proudly in the background. He had never really understood the nature of traditional Anishinaabe music, its words and meanings, but that was indeed his grandfather's swinging of the drumstick, being as native could be. Mitchell even recognized a few of the other men seated beside Papa Peter from his occasional visit to Otter Lake. The only problem was the silence. Drum music wasn't silent. As his father once said, it needed to be heard, celebrated, felt, and sung to. Instead, all Mitchell heard was the sterile hiss of the ship's recycled air. Mitchell, you are still silent. Did I do something wrong? No, not at all. This is just unexpected. Thank you, Mac. Kindness and concern from a computer? This was not the kind of service he expected from Mac out here cruising the asteroid belt. Perhaps you'd like to listen? Nodding before he spoke, Mitchell focused the view screen on his grandfather. I sure would, Mac, but you know, the acoustic restrictions in the ship. I believe you were issued headphones upon the assignment of the ship. Again, surprised, Mac was right. Somewhere in one of his service lockers were headphones. Standard equipment, but rarely used. Since each ship usually held only one crew member, there was little need for the privacy that headphones provided. Mitchell listened to a lot of music, but the feeds had been specifically modified not to agitate the ship's sensors. For a true audio nerd, it was sacrilege, no different than serving tofurkey at Thanksgiving. Feeling eagerness for the first time in a long time, Mitchell maneuvered himself around in his compartment, opening one locker after another. His mission now was to find those headphones. I believe you will find them in the compartment right above the door lock display. Once again, Mac was right. Mitchell's appreciation for the computer was growing. Mac, you're a lifesaver. Mitchell plugged them into the proper input jack. A little bit of an exaggeration, but I will accept the compliment. Enjoy. Thanks, Mac. Mitchell felt real gratitude to the automated voice and programmed personality. All in a day's work. I will take care of business while you mourn your grandfather. Putting the headphones on, Mitchell could hear Papa Peter's voice rising above the others and feel the pounding of the drum. He could feel everything his grandfather was washing over him. It felt good. Song after song made him realize that even though he was only 1/4 Anishinaabe, he could be fairly confident that he was the only Anishinaabe out here on the asteroid belt, possibly the only one outside of Earth and the 3 space stations. And this was the only drum music for millions and millions of kilometers. This was a responsibility. As his grandfather used to say, he better step up and represent because he was a hell of a long way from home. Mitchell started humming, his fingers beating a rhythm on the plastic console. As promised, Mac watched over Mitchell as he visited with his grandfather.